Only a couple of days away from the second test in the Border Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India at the Adelaide Oval. So I thought now was a good time to just do a quick audio diary of preview thoughts. Got a couple of things rattling around my head heading into this game. First of all, I suppose we'll talk a little bit about the last couple of times the two sides have played in Adelaide. Then I've got a bit of a question about Steve Smith, some of the headlines, or not just headlines, thoughts that people are having about why he's struggling at the moment and whether or not he can turn it around. And then lastly, just some thoughts on India and how they can go from strength to strength potentially. But first off, just the last two times, that seemed like the most relevant recent history to me was the last two times that India have toured in Australia. Go back to the 2018/19 tour. India and Australia played at the Adelaide Oval. This wasn't listed as a day-night game. This was just a normal test match, at least per Crick Info. India won this one by 31 runs. It was Pujara who was man of the match, made 123 and then 71. India, they made 250 in their first innings. Australia responded with 235. India chalked up 307 and then dismissed Australia for 291. So it's sort of a match, fairly even batting performances, I suppose. Only one score below 250. That was Australia's 235. No scores higher than 307. So, yeah, fairly even sort of match. In terms of how both teams performed, India getting the win by 31 runs. The next time they played at Adelaide Oval was in 2020. This was a day-night test. Australia won by 8 wickets. Tim Payne was man of the match. 73 not out plus 7 catches. India made 244 in the first innings. Australia could only manage 191 in reply. So they trailed on the first innings. They then skittled, even feels like too kind of phrase. They demolished, they decimated India for 36 runs. India all out for just 36 in their second innings. Australia raced to the win by 8 wickets, finishing 2 for 93 in their second innings. So that one a bit more volatile in terms of the batting performances. India, sort of a tale of not two halves, but two innings, 244 and then all out for 36. It was, as I said, volatile. And that, I suppose, has been, that can happen with the day-night tests, the way the sessions line up and the pink ball at night, in the evening and all those sorts of things. It seems like strange things can happen. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. This is a day-night match. I saw a stat somewhere. Australia are 11-1 in their 12 day-night test matches, but the last one they played, they lost. That was against the West Indies. I don't know. I sometimes, maybe cricket more than other sports, you can read things into some of the, historical matches, but how far back do you go before it's sort of irrelevant, before, pitches have changed and teams have changed and the game's changed. So that's why I thought really very pointless, I think, in my opinion, to look much further back than the last two times India have toured. And even then, it's a little bit of a stretch as well. So that is the recent history between the two sides in Adelaide anyway. Big question for me that's swirling around is about Steve Smith. And it's funny, there's been a lot of commentary, and it makes sense why there's the commentary that, he's now older, 35. Maybe the eyesight is not what it once was, and now that sort of eccentric technique, walking across the stumps has, which relies on him hitting the ball and not getting wrapped on the pads, albeit, it's relying on that elite hand-eye coordination, that maybe as those eyes have dropped off just a touch, it's now putting him in a position where he's finding himself really struggling to take on the world's best bowlers like Jasprit Bumrah and company. He's 23 test innings since his last test ton. That was back in June 2023. That includes 11 scores below 20. So it is a lengthy stint at the moment where he's struggling to put runs together. And it's not like he's racking up, 50s and 60s and 70s, at a decent rate, but just failing to convert them. Like half the time he's not even making it to 20. So before those last 23 innings, he'd actually had 3 tons in the previous 13. So it's not that long ago that we saw him making triple figures. I'm wondering whether there's a technique adjustment that's possible. I know he's at the sort of tail end of his career, presumably. But batsmen adjust all the time in game. Even, where they'll stand a bit deeper in their crease, or they'll, come out, stand a bit further out of their crease, or whatever it might be, reduce backlift, or I just wonder, and you could definitely take the position of saying, well, he's scored the majority of his runs, playing with this sort of more, creative, eccentric batting stance and technique, the exaggerated walk across and the bat sort of flying out towards, point almost, and then he's, flicking it through covers or flicking it through, mid-wicket, or like, I understand you could say, well, he'll stick with what's worked, but then you go back and look at how he started his career. I went back and had a look at some highlights of an innings he played in 2011, and there's a little bit of a trigger movement, back across the stumps, but nothing. It's chalk and cheese compared to what he does now. I put up on Blue Sky, if you go and search Jake Botel on Blue Sky, I just put up a comparison of screenshots of him playing a drive-through cover from both innings. And there's attached videos there from YouTube as well. And it's just insane, 2 balls off a fast bowler, 6 years apart essentially, and how he arrives at the cover shot is just really interesting. And, the one from 2011 where he made, I think it was 50 in the Ashes early on in his career, just a lot more sort of classical. I suppose I just wonder, the one argument is that he'll stick with what works. The other is that he's a batsman that has tinkered and adapted before. You can see that in the evolution of where he started to where he is now. Like, who's to say he can't come out and do something a bit different? I'm not saying like a wholesale change of his technique, but I'm sure that someone who has played elite Test cricket as long as Steve Smith has is going to be working on ways around it. And so I'm interested to see, is there going to be a moment on the broadcast, if he makes a few runs, say he doesn't have a massive breakthrough, but say he makes 30 or 40 in the first innings for Australia. And I wonder if we're going to see a moment on broadcast where they're analysing and going, just have a look at the difference between, this game in Adelaide versus the game, last week in Perth, and, look at this subtle adjustment that Smith's made, and he's obviously made that in response to, I don't know, I can just see a reality where that's the case. He's a great player, and I think great players do continue to innovate, to try and find ways through their rough patches. It's so hard to imagine that this is just the end of Steve Smith scoring runs. And admittedly, he's not going to play bowling attacked like what India have every Test match. But let's face it, Test cricket, it's a pretty... there's not a lot of places to hide in Test cricket if you get sort of found out. So it is a matter of finding a way through. And yeah, I'm just going to be interested. I'm going to be interested to watch that. Does he sort of stick with much of the same, or are there little adjustments that he makes in this Test match to try and negate some of what Jasprit Bumrah has offered up? And it's important, and the reason I sort of feel it's so important is because who else in this Australian lineup has the capability, the ceiling in terms of their batting to turn the series for Australia? Obviously Travis Head made some great runs. He is an aggressive batsman who can change the course of a Test match in one session. But, in terms of being the anchor batsman for a lineup, I mean, that's Steve Smith, isn't it? I don't know if I can identify another batsman in Australia's lineup that you go, the innings needs to be anchored around a big knock from this player. Apart from Steve Smith, he for better or worse, came in as the player I think that was still regarded as Australia's premier batsman despite his struggles. So I think it's key for him to turn it around if Australia are going to have any chance to salvage, what could otherwise be a very long Test summer. So yeah, I'm fascinated to see. And obviously, I think they'll improve. I don't think Australia are going to be that bad. I don't think India can be as good 2 Test matches in a row. I think it'll change up a bit. Yeah, I think that's just how it will go. I think Australia will come out pretty fired up to produce a better result. I think they'll have made a few changes, and I suppose it's the changes that someone like Smith makes that interest me the most, given how much he's been sort of struggling and given how important he still is to that batting lineup. It sort of speaks a bit to the fact that, what does Australia have coming through the ranks, I guess, in terms of depth at these batting positions. Have they developed, the replacements for these players? Not that it's an easy thing to develop a player to replace, Steve Smith. India, of course, they might just go from strength to strength in terms of their personnel. Rohit Sharma and Shubman Gill are likely to come back in, I think. I'm recording this on Thursday night, so by the time you listen, Wednesday night rather, so by the time you listen to it, those selections might have been confirmed. Gill obviously averages 36 in Test match cricket with 5 tons in 29 tests. Sharma, 42 average with 1200s in 64 tests. So, they can come in and just strengthen what was an already really strong effort from India with the bat. And I'm looking forward to watching Jaiswal play again. That was honestly my first opportunity to see him. I haven't watched as much Test cricket. I haven't been able to watch as much Test cricket the last few years. So watching him was incredible. And, just every shot in the book and a glorious innings. He's averaging 58 in 15 tests. He's got 4 Test hundreds. He's just peeled off his first one in Australia. I love how disappointed he looked when he finally got out. That desire to just score runs and mountains of them. I don't think you can sort of... it's such an important skill to have. I think it's such a great trait to have that you can, you don't just want to rack up triple figures. You want to rack up 150s and double tons. It's a special kind of appetite that the best players have. So yeah, India, they can bring strength back in, and also they've got, younger players on the block like Jaiswal who are going to drive their next era as well as the present. All right, those are my thoughts on this Test match. I have a feeling that India might win this second Test. I think Jasprit Bumrah with that pink ball might just do enough to get India a 2-0 Test lead. I think the draw is the least likely result in this day-night Test match. So, all right, that's all my thoughts. If you could hit that subscribe button, greatly appreciate it. Thanks for watching. And, enjoy the Test.